Hey, I am back for part 3. I am so sorry it's taken so long. Just a lot of stuff has gone down in the last week or so, and just recording hasn't been the top priority. But anyhow, yeah, let's get into it. So I left off with, having decided to take a 23&Me DNA test, and so that took place after my 5th year in California. Okay, so this was just before I had decided to move back to New Mexico, which is that's a whole story within itself, for the reasons that I had chosen that at the time. Just a major shift happened for me, and I had to follow what I needed to follow at that time. But anyhow, so I decided just before then that I would go ahead and take the 23&Me, and then send it off before I got to New Mexico. So I took the DNA, I got the DNA kit, followed all of the instructions, and sent it in. Had the kit sent in, and then moved back to New Mexico. It takes about 6 to 8 weeks to get your results. So by the time that I did receive my results, I was already living in my mom's house. When we had first moved back to New Mexico, Noah and I, we stayed at my mom's house. Obviously, there were a lot of factors involved. I still needed to get a job. I didn't even know how long I was going to be staying. Honestly, there's a lot that goes into that move back. And to be completely honest, I really didn't expect to stay there long at all. I expected to be there for a few months, maybe through the end of the summer, and then head back to Cali. Like, there was no idea that I would stay as long as I did. And so, when I got there, it was the beginning of March. And when I got my results, it was April 11th. It was April 11th, 2018. And I remember that date so clearly because, one, it's my grandmother's birthday. My grandmother on my dad's side, my dad, of course, who raised me. Just a reminder, I don't know my biological father. So anytime I'm saying my dad, I'm talking about my dad who raised me, my Mexican dad. So my grandmother on his side, it was her birthday, or would have been her birthday. She passed away when I was 15. But I remember she kept sending me signs before then, and it was just really interesting, and I don't know where your spiritual beliefs lie and things like that, but I truly believe that people who have passed on are still with us in many ways, and they try to show us different things, and they try to prove their presence to us. So in many ways, I was receiving her signs, and I was receiving them long before this too, but they had been very, very prevalent over the recent year. And so I just felt like she kept trying to interact with me in a lot of ways. And so I received the results on her birthday, which I felt was very interesting. And so I am sitting at the table with my mom, and I see on my email on my phone, and it says like from 23&Me, your reports are ready. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So like I secretly am like, okay, let me go take a look at this. And so I excused myself and I went to the bathroom, and I opened the results, the reports, and I scroll down, and I'm seeing, the percentage of European, which is white, my mom's side, obviously. I was like, I know that. There was no question for me that my mom was my mom. I wanted to see the next part. So I scroll down, and sure enough, right in front of me, it's, sub-Saharan African, West African, Nigerian, just all in my face, and it makes up the other half. And there's no Hispanic, none, not a drop, not a drop, no, nothing. And I'm in shock. And it's one of those things where, you may internally feel like the truth, or you feel like, I'm questioning this, like I really just need to know. But until the truth is like staring you right in the face, you don't know how you're going to respond to it. And you don't realize like how it's going to affect you, or like it's still hard to believe, even if it's something that you have kind of questioned or believed to be true. Once you see it, it's like if you've taken a pregnancy test and the results are positive, and you're like, oh shit, like I did miss my period, but wait, like this is for real. That's how it's like. You're looking at the results like, okay. And so it was just a lot to consume, because now I'm like, okay, first of all, I am not what I was told my whole life, and I was right. I'm a completely different race than I was conditioned to believe that I was, and my dad is not my dad, is not my biological father. So who is it? So then this, I had to sit on this for a while. I said nothing for 24 hours. I said nothing to my mom about it. I didn't say anything to anybody about it really, but I just was like, oh my gosh. And so I remember kind of walking through the house, and my mom is very old school. She still like hangs clothes from the line, like when she does laundry to dry and stuff like that. So I like walked through the house, and that morning my son had already gone to school. My mom's husband was at work, so it was just my mom and me at the house. And so I walked through the kitchen, and I was just gonna grab something to drink, and she wasn't in there anymore. And so I kind of glanced outside to the backyard, and I see that she is hanging clothes on the line. And I just stood there and like stared at her, like watched her. And it's kind of far, so she couldn't see that I was, staring at her. And I just remember thinking, just like watching her and like, wow, like what is what is she holding on to, and I didn't mean it in a negative sense. I just meant it in the sense of like, how must this feel to have that secret inside of you for so long? I'm 31 years old at this time. And I'm thinking, she's been holding this secret for 31, possibly almost 32 years. And how, like, how does a body hold on to a secret like that for so long? I'm just watching her hang clothes, and there's just so many things going through my mind. And I felt a lot of different emotions. I don't know that I necessarily felt angry at that point, because my mom and I had already had such a tough relationship. We just had a tendency to butt heads a lot. And growing up, I just wasn't the nicest person to her. And I think we just never really understood each other. And so, and maybe internally I just always knew something was off, or maybe I knew I was, there was some deceit, or I don't know. There was just something that I just couldn't, that there was a blockage that would not allow me to feel a certain connection with my mom that I wanted to feel, and that I think that most children would want to feel with their parents, or vice versa. But so I felt like sadness. I didn't feel angry right away. I felt compassion. And I think the only reason I felt compassion was because by this time in my life, I had already gone through so much in my own experiences as an adult, as a woman who has, had different relationships with men, and who has made mistakes along the way, and who has, fallen vulnerable to men in different ways, and who has, done things that I wish I hadn't, or dated people, talked to people, or had certain relationships that I wish I had not had. And so I think at this point it was more understanding. But it's layers. It's layers. So, it took me until the next day, like I said, to confront her, with this information. So, the next day, I walked up to her. She was sitting at the table, and again, my son was at school. Her husband had gone to work by this time, so it was just the two of us. And she's sitting and she's reading the newspaper. Like I said, she's very, she's in her ways. And so she's reading a newspaper, and she's eating oatmeal. And so I go and I sit at the table and I say, I need to have an uncomfortable conversation with you. And she's like, okay. And so she kind of puts the newspaper down, and I can tell she's nervous, and, who knows what she thinks I'm going to say, but it's not that. Like, I can tell you straight up, she had no idea I was going to even bring that up. So I said something to the effect of, I did a 23&Me DNA test. As you know, I've always questioned things about myself, and I had told you at one point that I wanted to do one, and I decided to do one. And she's like, she's very good at keeping a straight face and like hiding her emotions. So you don't really always know what she's thinking, but I'm sure there was a lot that was going on in her body and mind at that moment. And I said, well, it showed that I can't remember how I said it. I just said something like, it showed basically that I'm half Black. And she's like, well, what was the percentage? And I'm like, is she serious right now? Like, what was the percentage? Like, and I don't know if she was just trying to dodge or try to come up with something else, or like, what was going on. But I said, well, half, like, there was no Hispanic, is what I proceeded to say. No Hispanic, no Mexican, no like Black and white, European, sub-Saharan African. That's what it was, basically. And so she kind of sits back and she's like, okay. And she's like, I've wanted to tell you this your whole life. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, so if the results weren't already enough to be staring me in the face, I'm looking at the reports on my phone. That's already something I'm trying to process. Again, I took 24 hours to try and process that information. And then for her to say, I've wanted to tell you this your entire life, it was just like, oh my God, this is really happening. Like, it just felt like I was like, what is going on? Like, this is so surreal. And the fact that I had moved home when all of this when all of this took place, and I had moved home, and what made me move home was completely almost unexplainable, other than a feeling. It was just like, this is so surreal right now. And so anyhow, she moves forward, and lets me know about, my biological father. And she gives me his name, and she tells me what he looked like. And it explained a lot because, I've always been, up until like last year, I've always been extremely skinny, very small, and very athletically built. And I'm tall, tall-ish, I guess. But long, long legs, long arms, like long torso, just tall and skinny. And, she's like, well, he was dark skin, tall, skinny, athletically built. And he wore glasses, which I wore glasses growing up too. I wear contacts now. And my mom doesn't. She doesn't have any issues with her eyesight. And so I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, it's another thing I used to question myself about, was like, why, like, my body looked so different from, the build of my family members. And I was tall, and I, towered over my mom and my dad. I'm about the same height as my dad, but super, super skinny I was, and very like athletically built, and like muscular arms and like that sort of thing. And I used to question that too. Like, where did this come from? Because my brother, I mean, he was skinny-ish, but he wasn't, he's taller than me. But it just wasn't the same. It just wasn't the same. So I'm like, okay, this is adding up. Anyway, she tells me her side of the story. And I'm not going to get into the whole sides of the story thing right now, because I think that that's something that I still need to work out with my parents, because they did have a couple different versions to the story. So my mom had her side of the story, and then I sat with that for a few days, and then I texted my dad and I said, hey, I need to talk to you. I'd prefer to talk to you in person, and I need to do it privately. I'm not going to bring Noah with me. And at the time I had moved back to New Mexico. My dad was living in the town an hour and a half away, in the town where I grew up. And my mom was living in the town where I was born. So I was living with my mom in the town where I was born, and I just felt more comfortable living there. I really didn't want to be in the town where I grew up. So anyhow, I texted my dad that I would drive over there and see him, but that it would just be the two of us. I wouldn't be bringing Noah, and that I'd prefer if he came alone. And so he agreed, and he had no idea what was coming. I got to walk into work here in a second. He had no idea what was coming, but he agreed to meet with me, and I'll leave it there for now. It's just turning into part after part after part, but yes, so that was part 3, and I will get into part 4 in the conversation with my dad in the next video. Thanks.